All right, so we're going to get started at our webinar here, and the headline was A License to Kill the Garner Marsh with Don McLean. We were trying to figure out what to call this segment. Many people here have been part of the ongoing Save Our Streams initiative trying to save the Garner Marsh. Some folks might remember the Follow the Flow video, and in fact, let me share my screen to remind folks of the work that's been done. But Save Our Streams Hamilton made an excellent video detailing how the headwaters here at the Garner Marsh are the top of the flow through the Ancaster Creek and then down on into Cootes Paradise, and that what happens up there is related to how that water makes its way all throughout the city. And when we talk about this OLT settlement, it's been a long case. There's lots and lots of updates. It's hard to keep abreast of where we are now and what the situation is looking like for the Garner Marsh after these years of provincial tribunals. So to get us caught up on, kind of what's been happening up to now and where things are going from here, we're going to get Don McLean from our Conservation Matters group to give us an update.
Thanks, Lucia. Thanks to all of you for coming out to hear this program tonight. And thanks to a lot of people who have made a contribution to protecting the Garner Marsh over the last 5 years. It has been 5 years since this work began. And 2 days from now, on Friday, the Ontario Land Tribunal is holding what is called a settlement hearing, at which point we will hear in some detail what the agreement has been between the land developers who want to convert a large portion of 140 Garner Road into a warehouse complex, and the city of Hamilton, who have been the two parties to the Ontario Land Tribunal hearing. So the OLT decision, we know already, will okay more destruction of our planet in the name of corporate profit. Piece by piece, the planet is sold off, its inhabitants forcefully evicted, both the wildlife that have lived there for millennia, and in this particular case, the agricultural plants that have helped to feed us. Their loss will be another trashing of our sworn responsibility to our Indigenous treaty partners and another violation of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. But it is worth reflecting at this point on what has been achieved in 5 years of struggle, 5 years of public effort, and protecting both the marsh and the foodlands that surround it. The mapping that is up there is out of date. The one you're seeing, it is what they'd hoped to do, put 5 warehouses on this. It is somewhat changed from there, and that's one of the things that we have information about. What has been released to this point is a map of what the land uses will be if the settlement agreement is completed, which we expect it will be, and if in fact the developers go ahead, which is an open question. But what we know at this point is that map and a 535-page document, which is essentially the positions adopted by the developers' agents, and which reflects the settlement agreement with the city.
Don,
So,
just to make sure I'm giving everyone the updated map, is
there
this
we
the
go.
updated map here?
That is that's the updated map at this point, yes.
So can we just take a step back and maybe break it down for folks that haven't been following closely what's been happening with the Garner Marsh up till this point, and maybe just have you talk us through what the features are right now and what the proposal is to move a wetland, and can you even move a wetland? Or I think this is worth drilling down into some detail. So this is the plan right now, but this here shows the same parcel of land rotated a little bit, and this here is the wetland feature as it exists, and some of the other things that they've highlighted here, like butternut trees, different species of concern, essentially, in this parcel of land that's going to be developed. I don't know, Don, if you want to speak to the current state of the marsh and then where this wetland moving is happening.
Sure. What you're seeing on the right side of that, and just getting us located, is Highway 6 extension near Garner Road. Garner Road is on the top of your screen there. So this is located right at the corner of Highway 6 and Garner Road, and it has it is part of the Airport Employment Growth District, so it has been zoned for industrial development. And the proposal here is to try to take advantage of that zoning and convert it to a warehouse complex. They aimed for 5 warehouses. They appear to be going down to possibly down to 4, although they don't indicate that on the mapping or the documents that have been released. What we can see from this mapping, which has just been released in the last week, is that the wetland, which was in the middle, isn't there anymore. But what is there in the top block in the center is what is now described as a wetland. It isn't at this point, but the plan from the developers initially and being proceeded with here was to just slide over that wetland to get it out of the way of their development. It's in an inconvenient location. So they want to construct what they're calling a new wetland, which will occupy most of that block. There's another large block down on the lower right-hand corner, which is a woodlot. It is being preserved, and some small additions are being made to it. There's some woodlot that is immediately adjacent to the property, which is between the property and Highway 6. So a portion up in the upper right-hand corner is also going to be left as woodlot, and maybe some planting going on there. The small lines going around here, this little path, is a linkage being put in place to allow for, apparently, connection between the wetland and the woodlot on this side of the property and the large woodlot on the other side of the property. And out in front, there's some other blocks, a large block of land set aside for a stormwater pond. Stormwater will be a major issue coming out of here. This area has been part of the headwaters of Ancaster Creek, and the wetland has been at that very headwaters, and Ancaster Creek flows out of it. We will now see if this development proceeds the way the developers have called for it, most of this property become impervious. Basically, the large block in the middle, which they're calling the development block, is either warehouses or parking lots and truck bays for that warehouse. So this is the problem that we're facing, but I think it's worth reflecting on what we've done so far. The amount of public opposition that has emerged very quickly on this. When this proposal first came before the Hamilton Conservation Authority, seeking a permit to relocate and I put that in air quotes, the wetland, there were 8 delegations to their public meeting and over 200 letters. And surprisingly, at least it was surprising to us, the board at the Conservation Authority, which was not composed of the people who is there now, a couple of them were, but most of them were people that had been former members of council or people that had been appointed by them, and it was headed by the former councillor from Ancaster, Mr. Ferguson. But as it turned out, the Conservation Authority Board voted to reject this application. And that was a huge victory for the public. It is pretty much unprecedented for the Conservation Authority to reject a development application, and it certainly probably was a surprise to the developers. They appealed this, and what we're seeing this week is the end of that appeal process as it's played out, and it's been complicated, and I won't try to unravel all the pieces of it. But the defense of the marsh has been led by Save Our Streams Hamilton and our Conservation Matters group of Hamilton 350. The latter group meets every week and actually had an hour and a half meeting earlier this afternoon as we're looking at what do we do next and where do we go from here. This is not the end of the marsh, but it is a significant step in the developer's process of trying to get approvals in place to do what they want to do with this piece of property.
Thanks, Don. And it sounds like that's not the end of this saga. There's going to be more information coming from us once we see what the outcome of that settlement hearing is.
Yes, and we see a lot of that already because we expect that the document that has been released, the 535-page document, will be the settlement and is unlikely to be changed very much. It includes about 80 steps that the developers still have to go through before they can build. Approvals of various sorts, including arrangements with the city. There will be, according to this process, a need to widen Garner Road, a need for the stormwater facility, of course. They have to figure out how to relocate the wetland and go through that process, and a string of things that are requirements. Many of them are normal requirements. Some of them are very specific. And what I think is worth noting within this is that there's been a change from the original application. So the original application called for 25. This property is 35 hectares. The original application called for 25 of those to be set aside for warehousing and parking and truck bays and so on. That number has dropped to a little over 20 hectares. So there has been a 20% drop in the size of the property being developed, and that 20% has generally gone to more positive things. Whatever comes out of this wetland that they want to create is part of that. It's larger than it was anticipated to be. It's gone up by about a half a hectare. I mean, I can even throw up here, I think, if I share my screen. Here we go. Yeah. So you can see on the left-hand side of this chart what they had applied for, and on the right-hand side what they are now have accepted as an agreement that we assume will be finalized on Friday. So the employment area where the warehouses and the parking lots has shrunk. The woodland area has increased somewhat. They're adding some area to it, which will require planting. The street area is not surprised. They need a new road to service this. Stormwater facility has substantially increased, maybe a reflection of the fact that there's a big stormwater potential problem coming out of this property. There's a section of open space that's almost tripled. There's that linkage that I was pointing out to, but there's also the wetland has gone from 3.4 hectares to almost 4 hectares. And all of those pieces and they're all asterisked, are going to become city property. So a substantial portion of this property, if it is developed as is being proposed, and this will take years to do, um, is going to end up in public hands, including the areas which seem to be most ecologically significant, the woodlot and the wetland, or the new wetland, whatever it's able to provide. Um, so I think that's a key piece. And one of the things that comes out of this is that the enlarged wetland actually takes in a bit of the existing wetland. That wasn't the case before. And that potentially gives perhaps an opportunity for inhabitants of the wetland to migrate uh, if the process is undertaken in some kind of reasonable way. And the number of conditions that still have to be met and have to be largely approved of by the city, by city officials, also gives us an opportunity to highlight the problems with those conditions as they play out, problems with the way they're being responded to, and may give us the opportunity to further the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years, to challenge the whole idea that we can take these lands and convert them to profitable warehousing, generally warehousing all around the airport area. This is only one of many developments that are being proposed in this area, but this is going to be somewhat precedent setting. So we're hopeful that that is one of the things that we can work further on, including monitoring what is there now. The developers have hired an ecologist, so-called, to lay out an environmental impact statement and environmental plans. The ecologist doesn't appear to us to be very competent, or is in the usual position of ecologists hired by developers to be locked into a necessarily biased position, a position of being you do what the developer wants you to do, you find what the developer wants you to find, and you don't find what the developer doesn't want you to find. And if you don't follow that pattern, you don't get rehired. You don't get rehired by other developers who might have need for going through these services. There is a requirement, interestingly, for the developers to obtain a permit from the Hamilton Conservation Authority with respect to the existing wetland. That was the originator of this process. The developers have been arguing that they can just move this thing over, but they still have to go through the permit process. And in the process that we've been following, they have done some dipsy doodling on that. The other point that I want to, and this brings into the other point that I want to leave you with, this has been very much a process that has been repeatedly intervened by the provincial government on behalf of the developers in one form or another, whether they don't call it directly, but there have been a string of steps that have been taken that have made this possible for the developers to proceed and overcome hurdles that they were encountering. The appeal process, for example, to the Conservation Authority rejection would normally have gone to a provincial tribunal for a hearing, and that provincial tribunal was specifically set up to hear appeals from Conservation Authority decisions and similar things from other agencies. That appeal board was demolished by the provincial government and replaced with the Ontario Land Tribunal. And the Ontario Land Tribunal is really the replacement for the Ontario Municipal Board, and it does everything. And it has already made clear that it has no problem with relocating wetlands. It's done that already on another property that we've been dealing with in the Airport Employment Growth District. And it has also established in its first year and a half of operation that 97% of its decisions were in favor of the developers, not in favor of the municipalities. Another rule that was changed along the way was that conservation authorities have been hampered in a string of ways. Uh, and one of the fundamental ones was that they were banned. This is literally right in the legislation. You may no longer, as a conservation authority, give advice to municipalities. And conservation authorities have done that for decades. And in fact, municipalities have generally not had the staff to address ecological issues because they have conservation authorities they can turn to for advice. But they've also now eliminated the ability, the ways in which the conservation authorities can reject permits. So there was a basis to reject permits on the basis of endangered species, significant environmental habitat. Those things could be utilized by conservation authorities as reasons why you can't do this to the developers. That's all been knocked out. Conservation authority can now only make decisions on permits with respect to flooding and erosion. And then this appeal that the developers launched very shortly after they were rejected by the Conservation Authority in 2021, it went on for over 600 days. And in December of 2024, they suddenly withdrew it. We were 2 or 3 weeks away from the scheduled hearings, and they just pulled the whole thing out. And they immediately made a new application. And the reason they did that is that the new application would be under rules much more favorable to the developers. In addition, by pushing this into a new process, they eliminated the historical right of citizen groups and environmental groups to participate as full parties in Ontario Land Tribunal hearings. So now it's only allowed, the only ones allowed to be at the hearing in terms of making any, providing any serious evidence and bringing forward witnesses and so on, is the developers and the municipalities. So when they pulled this stuff out, when they pulled their appeal and launched a new appeal, they effectively pushed out the Conservation Authority, which had been there as a party to the hearing. They pushed out Environmental Defense, which we had succeeded in bringing on and raised funds, over $30,000 to provide for witnesses for them. They were all pushed out. So the hearing process now before the Ontario Land Tribunal has eliminated those environmental voices and those public voices. And there's been other changes made along the way, each of which has been helpful to the developers and harmful to the protection of things like the Garner Marsh.
Well,
So
Don, I would say thanks for highlighting the wins that we can still achieve at the provincial level and hopefully still push for. And, that history of how, that process is really, the fight has moved to a provincial level, right? Hamiltonians at the local level dealing with the conservation authorities, dealing with the city. Now developers are just running, around the end and saying, well, I'm going to go right to the province. And this is a really precedent-setting case, as you're saying, right? Hamilton is one of the few areas that has mobilized citizen groups like Conservation Matters following very closely these very complicated proceedings and still demanding action and demanding better every step of the way. I'm sorry to have to cut you there as the facilitator and move us on to talk about air pollution and green steel. But thanks for giving us the rundown of what's been happening with the Garner Marsh, and we're going to keep everybody posted through the Hamilton 350 newsletter on what happens after Friday's settlement hearing and what the next steps are going to be.
thank you.
Oh,
Thanks for
thank
the
you, Don. You're a
opportunity.
wealth of knowledge. And speaking of switching gears, because that's my job is to make us switch gears here. some folks might have seen, we've been talking so far about protecting headwaters and water pollution. Some folks might have seen some headlines from CBC Hamilton, which has been killing it on the coverage around our largest air polluter. So articles about extending green steel from 2028 to 2050 immediately followed up with, well, you can't say when that's actually going to happen. That would be irresponsible. Things like Ontario declining to investigate ArcelorMittal Dofasco emissions, and also looking to extend with another term the approval to exceed provincial regulations. So there's a lot of headlines that folks might have seen from CBC Hamilton lately. It's a lot of different pieces to follow. We've invited Evan Bean from Environment Hamilton, who is the Green Steel campaigner there at Environment Hamilton, to come talk about all these different projects going on. It's not just Dofasco, it's also other industrial players down there. But like Dofasco is a big part of this story. And maybe Evan, you can take it away and tell us what's been happening and where things are headed.
Sounds good. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Hold on. I seem to have lost that capability. Oh, found it. Okay, we're good. Okay, can everyone see that now?
Yes, yes, we can.
All right, nice. I think I have the date wrong. It's February 25th. So that's one thing. And it's also 2026. So let's ignore that and keep going on. So yeah, some stuff I'm going to talk about today. Context of the steel industry in Canada and or in Hamilton and where we're at. Talk about clean or green steel, although a lot of people here probably know that already. So I won't take too much time on that piece. Go through some Ontario air quality regulations and what an environmental compliance approval is. So that's kind of what I got. And Lucia will definitely cut me off if I take too long. So that's good. So in terms of the steel industry in Hamilton, I'm gonna give a timeline of events of kind of what we've seen since ArcelorMittal Dofasco announced that it was going to undertake this decarbonization project, which it's called a decarbonization project. It's not technically, they didn't plan to fully decarbonize, as you will see. But in July of 2021, they announced this project in jointly with the government of Canada. They said it would be $1.8 billion dollars. The government of Canada pledged $400 million dollars of that. And later on, the government of Ontario pledged $500 million dollars to that. So about half of the cost of the project. Um, and it was a big announcement. So they said that they would be transitioning their usual blast furnace steel with electric technology, and instead of the coke plants, they would be producing iron with fossil gas, or what the fossil fuel industry likes to call natural gas. Um, so they promised overall greenhouse gas emissions of 60% because they would still be using fossil gas. But it would eliminate the coal from the process. And the coal piece is where a lot of the most harmful air contaminants uh, are produced. And so the main two of these are benzene and benzoapyrene. So um, yeah, some good things about this announcement, some not so good things. Um, And then in February of 2023, so about a year and a half after that announcement, some representatives from Dofasco and Enbridge presented at City Council talking about a new fossil fuel gas pipeline to power the transition away from coal at Dofasco. Um, I mean, everyone on this call probably knows, like, climate scientists at that time were urgently calling for no more fossil fuel infrastructure, and obviously they continue to make those calls. Residents, many on this call, voiced concerns at that meeting, uh, asking, if there was a way to maybe even reduce gas use elsewhere in the city to redirect it to Dofasco instead. And there were two public consultations held by the company in March of 2023, but we've heard no updates on this pipeline project since then. Um, so from environmental standpoint, that's good. In March of 2023, an update related to this project that people might not be as aware of is Hamilton City Council passed a motion directing the mayor to contact the Ontario Minister of Environment to articulate that the city of Hamilton is opposed to any extension or continued special permissions for contaminants being emitted above the regular Ontario guidelines. So that's a long way of saying that uh, these companies, Dofasco, Stelco, and their offshoots downtown in the eastern end, uh, they have these agreements with the Ontario government that says they're allowed to emit more than what is usually allowed because of economic considerations. Um, so they're allowed to emit air contaminants that could be harmful to health. Um, so beyond the carbon greenhouse gas emissions impact of the steel industry, there is this air pollution and health impact, which is also significant. And I'd say even if, global warming, climate change wasn't a thing, it would probably be worth transitioning to electric technology for those health improvements alone. Um, but that happened in 2023. I'll get more into those site-specific standards later and what they are. Um, in July of 2023, the Ontario Ministry of the Environment was telling residents who attend these community liaison committees that these heavy industries are required to hold quarterly. And so Ontario government officials were saying, okay, this air quality standard that these industries had to follow, it was expiring, but we're going to come out with this new standard. And they promised that in July 2023, and they still haven't come out with one, unfortunately. In September of 2024, so we're almost a year past that point now, and 3 years past the announcement of the project, thanks to an investigation by CBC Hamilton, we know that key project milestones were missed, and also the original project manager had quit. There wasn't a specific reason given, but it can be kind of inferred. Um, and then another year after that, we had a Hamilton resident partner with Eco Justice, which is an environmental law group. They filed an investigation request into Dofasco's emissions because they had been allowed to operate for so long with this expired air quality standard. And in December, the Ontario Ministry of Environment denied the investigation request and said, no, like we're handling it. An important thing, though, um, from this December announcement is that at Dofasco, um, they were exempted from upgrading some of their equipment to adhere to more strict sulfur dioxide pollution limits because we were under the assumption, the Ministry of Environment was under the assumption that they wouldn't be using that equipment anymore. Um, Now that this project has been delayed, we don't know what the status of that is. So it's kind of a an unintended consequence of this project delay is now we could have had slightly better air quality because of these equipment upgrades that didn't happen. Um, and now what happened most recently in January of this year. So, first of all, myself and some others found that uh, the government of Canada's project agreement with Dofasco had been amended actually in March of last year. Um, no one said that it had been amended, but a lot of the language was watered down. The timeline to complete the project had been extended, it seemed like, in the amendment. So CBC investigated, and government representatives said they still expect the project to happen. They say by 2028, which is probably impossible at this point. It could probably be done by 2030 if they started construction now, based on what other steel facilities have done in their timeline for transitioning. Um, but the government also reported that the iron piece of this, which is the piece that would have required the new pipeline, that is going to be done in Montreal. So if this is true, then that's probably a good update from an environmental standpoint. Um, but the company did not confirm any of this stuff that the government said. So it's hard to say really what is planned still. Um, at a community liaison committee meeting after that CBC investigation came out. A lot of people attended. Yeah, like I said, company representatives didn't really commit to anything. They blamed the tariffs for their delays. Community member pointed out that these delays happened before the tariffs were a thing. They didn't really have anything to say about that. So yeah, and then, yeah, we put out a joint press release with Environmental Defense and Steel Watch, which is Steel Watch is a global kind of steel industry monitoring group. So we put out a press release after that CLC. You can read it if you want, but it's not too important. I just thought I'd put it in there. So that's the timeline of what we're dealing with this decarbonization project in quotes. Um, so yeah, we still don't have an updated timeline. Um, Dofasco is still operating under expired air quality standards, although they've at least done the due diligence of meeting their um, standard levels that they were supposed to prior to the expiry of them. And we it seems like the idea of a new pipeline in Hamilton and is out of the question, but still hasn't been confirmed. So yeah, I thought I could just give like an overview of the steel industry. It only contributes 2% of Canada's overall emissions, which isn't that much, but obviously we know from a Hamilton and Ontario perspective, it's still a sizable chunk. Um, there are 8 mills in Canada. There are 4 l larger ones. Um, and three of them are in Ontario. So ArcelorMittal produces the most per year, 4.1 million tons. And it used to be tied with Algoma for the most emissions, but now some of you may know that Algoma has transitioned to electric steel making, and so they're kind of out of the picture now, and Dofasco is alone at the top. Um,
Just a quick question on that point, Evan. So Algoma has done their part on transitioning. They have those electric arc furnaces. So the people of Sault Ste. Marie are not getting that coke-fired particulate matter, which is great. But the province, my understanding is that the province still hasn't held up their end of the bargain of getting them the electricity from Ontario's grid. And so they have to do local gas-fired generation to generate the electricity because the province refuses to hook them up. Is that correct? Do I have that summary more or less accurate?
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I haven't heard any reports of the province building out cleaner electricity options like wind and solar. And so if they're drawing electricity from the grid, then by default it's going to have a significant gas content, even if it's not 100%. Um, yeah. So
Well,
that's still an issue there for sure.
just to highlight on the provincial themes here, because we are talking a lot about how the province is impacting the local level. But anyhow, carry on.
Yeah. So I just thought I would include that like Canada is a net exporter of iron, the main product of steel. So if we account for like all of the, yeah, okay, so there's a question from Dave about this. Um, so the domestic steel industry in Canada produces 2% of our total emissions. If you account for all of the iron that we export and the steel that that produces, which does not count towards Canada's emissions, it would be more like 16%. So 2% plus 14% from this exported iron, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense.
And probably also worth highlighting that ArcelorMittal Dofasco, located in Hamilton on the top of that list of steel mills, is the largest point source of emissions in Ontario. It's also the largest point source of emissions that's not like in Alberta related to fossil fuel extraction. Like this is a huge piece, even though it might seem like a small amount with the accounting arithmetic, it's a really large emitter.
Yeah, so not super huge in terms of Canada specific, but Canada's a pretty big place. It's a big emitter if we're talking only Ontario, and if we're talking only Hamilton, it's 40% of our city's emissions, so quite a huge chunk. Um, the Stelco also still operates a facility in Hamilton. I thought I would highlight this because it's also responsible for some of the most hazardous air contaminants that I mentioned earlier. Um, so the Coke at Stelco, they only produce Coke, which I'll get into the next slide, I think. But it's basically only the first stage of the steel process happens at Stelco in Hamilton now. The Stelco plant in Lake Erie is integrated steel mill like Dofasco is. So I'd imagine a good amount of the coke produced at Stelco in Hamilton probably goes to that Lake Erie plant or also Dofasco or just gets exported, who knows. Um, but their emissions are less, still significant though, almost 3%. Um, so yeah, that's kind of a steel industry overview from an emissions standpoint. Yeah, so what actually is clean or green steel or like what the actual term should be is net zero steel. Um, First we got to get into how steel is made. So really simple, high level explanation. you mix iron ore with some limestone, uh, and then you add coal that has gone through a coking oven. And you put that into a blast furnace, which is where most of the carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions happen. Um, and then that's melted down to produce steel. Um, Once that's produced, it usually goes to some kind of fabricating facility where it's actually produced into various products. Um, so for green steel, hopefully people can see that highlight there. Um, it kind of replaces that coal-based process by taking scrap steel and putting it through an electric arc furnace. So it's, yeah, mostly recycled steel. Um, there are some now there is the when I was talking about the direct reduced iron facility that is going to be done in Montreal, there is still a need sometimes for some primary iron, and so that's where that process comes in, because you won't get a good enough quality product if you have 100% recycled steel. Um, so that's kind of what we're talking about with green steel. Now, yeah, what Lucia touched on. Oh, sorry, I have a direct reduced iron site actually. So this is currently produced at a plant in Montreal, but they use fossil gas, natural gas, to produce their direct reduced iron. Ideally, it's produced with hydrogen gas, and ideally, that hydrogen gas is created with wind and solar power. That's how you actually have a net zero steel process. Uh, the difference between a direct reduced iron that is powered by clean electricity steel making process versus your standard coal making steel process, you're talking about like a 98% emissions reduction. If you only if you have an electric furnace but you use uh natural gas for the iron reducing step, then we're talking like what ArcelorMittal announced about a 60% reduction, which is just not good enough. It doesn't meet any sustainable net zero steel standards.
And it's also worth highlighting, we were 350 members from the fossil fuel resistance group were at those public events, and we pressed them about whether or not they included upstream emissions from methane leaking out whenever these things are happening in Ontario. The source of this gas is out of sight, out of mind. It's in Pennsylvania, majority. And there are organizations in Pennsylvania doing great work pushing back on the fracking that's happening there. So worth noting that it might not be a Canadian impact, but taking that cross-border human view of what the impacts of the fracked gas are, they're huge on people's air and water quality. They're also big on our emissions, and because it crossed an international boundary, it didn't need to be included in the Canadian scope of emissions. So just another important little thing to highlight from that discussion. And Evan, just keeping an eye on the time. I know we've got a couple slides left. We'll try to get through so we can talk with Carrie about the human side of things.
All right, sounds good. So, yeah, I already mentioned this, but green hydrogen is what you want. That's what you should remember. Blue and gray hydrogen involve methane gas. Blue, I guess they think it's slightly better because they pump it underground instead of emitting it to the air. But yeah,
Carbon capture and storage, our
we all
favorite.
we all
Yeah.
know that that's kind of yeah, not all it's chalked up to be. Um, okay, so just quickly here, I'll go over the Ontario air quality regulations. So I mentioned this earlier, and this is what has expired at Dofasco and ArcelorMittal is the site Dofasco and Stelco, the site specific standards. So it's basically an exemption, although companies don't like it when you call it that. An exemption to pollute above what the regular Ontario air quality standard is. Um, and then there are also these technical standards, which is different because it's when the Ontario government comes in and says, okay, if you're operating a steel industry, then this is the equipment you're going to have to use. Um, and the idea behind that is certain types of equipment uh, might have better air quality um, impacts. So what I've been wondering is why can't the Ontario government come out with a technical standard that says any steel mill has to have electric arc furnaces at this point? Is that an option? I don't have a succinct answer for you uh, to that currently. That's something I'm going to be looking into more. Um, Yeah, I mentioned these two air quality contaminants. So, under the current site-specific standards that have expired, um, Dofasco is allowed to emit benzene about 14 times higher than the usual limit, and benzoapyrene almost 1,000 times higher, which is pretty ridiculous. Definitely, having significant health impacts to people who live in the area when you're exposed to that for a prolonged period of time, years and years, especially.
And worth pointing out, it's not just the area there. This is it's throughout the urban area, right? There's a lot of people who think they're far enough away that it doesn't impact the air where they are in Hamilton, and that studies are showing it's not true.
Yeah, like there's even impacts, as far as Ward 1 by the university, which is pretty far westward from those steel facilities, but there's still impact here. Um, okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about, there is currently an environmental compliance approval up for ArcelorMittal Dofasco, and it's on the Environmental Registry of Ontario website. And basically, why is this up currently? Industries submit these approvals to operate their facilities. Um, Site-specific or technical standards that I mentioned, they're usually part of these approvals. They will say, like, as part of this approval, you're going to have to operate under this air quality standard. Um, but Dofasco's environmental compliance approval, it includes a limited operational flexibility condition that basically regulates any construction they want to do there for new additions. So anything they already have in the plant, if they want to, do maintenance updates to that stuff is fine. But if they want to build something new, they can't just do that. They need to get permission from the Ontario government. And that condition expires every so often. Thanks, Lucia, for sharing the link to this. But basically, their previous approval, their agreement, it expired in 2023, and they're just reapplying now. So it's yeah, rough that it's taken them this long to reapply, and the government really, I don't know, didn't really say anything beforehand, I guess. Um, so we're preparing a comment submission on this approval. We're going to share a comment submission outline that all of you can add to and submit yourselves. And you can stay updated with that on environmenthamilton.org/steel. The last day to submit is March 12th. We'll probably have that outline for you to submit sometime at the end of this week or beginning of this week. So we will be sending out, an email update about that, and I'm sure, potentially Hamilton 350, if you're on their list, they'll likely share something as well. So that is what this is. it's always good for the communities to submit comments. I mean, I'm under no impression that we will change the government's mind necessarily by doing that, but it's an important step in the process of, spurring some kind of change here to be able to point to a bunch of comments that people have submitted.
Totally. And someone just said, what can we do? Can we appeal to a federal level? I've been having this conversation as well. And the most, as Evan said, one of the important things is that you need to get community members to register their opposition at the provincial level to then take that to the federal level and say, hey, what is going on? We need some intervention here in Ontario because we're being disregarded. So unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, there's not any existing pathway. It's not like the Migratory Birds Act or any other sort of federal thing that could help with land conservation. When it comes to providing these approvals for exemptions, the cards are in the provincial hands. And we would need to, again, register public opposition in order for the federal government to see that there's something wrong.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm being honest, there's a good chance that this will end up there at the federal level if we want to see anything done about the steel industry in Hamilton, in Ontario, and in Canada. But yeah, like Lucia said, if we want to get there, you often have to show all of your other options have been exhausted, or they can just do finger pointing and say, well, you didn't do this yet. So that's the track that we're currently on.
Okay, great. Thanks, Evan. Thank you for that update. And I'm sure people will be following what Environment Hamilton is doing. And I'm also I'm going to plug at the end of the event an event that you guys are being part of with the Ward 4 team in March. So I'll let people know about that coming. I wanted to jump ahead because we're already so far into our evening to talk with Carrie and switch it over to this final segment of our webinar, connecting it back to people. And I'll just wait for Evan's screen to disappear here. And maybe Carrie, if you want to come on camera and say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. For folks who maybe haven't met you before, do you want to just do a little quick introduction? Because you've got a very unique perspective that you bring here.
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. Yeah, and lovely to join everybody. Thanks so much for the invitation to be part of your webinar tonight. I keep getting those really annoying poor internet connection warnings. So I'm going to keep an eye on it. If I suddenly switch off my camera, it's because I'm trying to deal with that, and I hope I don't lose you or you lose me. Yeah, great to be with all of you. Lots of familiar names and faces here. And I imagine some of you may recognize me from various times of, I get around in Hamilton. Really pleased to be here tonight on behalf of my organization, Pivot Center for Collective Action. We're a national organization with two kind of anchor points here in Hamilton and also in Montreal. And we're really dedicated to looking at creating a more just world through the principle of collective action, that we will do more and do better together. That's it in broad strokes. Some folks may also know me through my work with the Ward 3 Councillor's Office. I've been working with Narendra Nan, who's the Ward 3 Councillor, since late 2019. My position with her is I'm the Community Climate Action Coordinator. It's a long title that can mean a lot of things, but one of the privileges it has provided me with is the opportunity to work really closely with residents living in the industrial North End in Ward 3 who are dealing with the daily lived impacts of environmental burdens. That's air, noise, odor, pollution, and everything else. And a lot of the work that I do with Pivot is really drawing from the frustration that I've experienced over the years of working with the city councillor and with this city and with the province. Shall I keep going, Lucia?
Sure. Why don't you take it away? And then I know I have some questions prepared, but finish your train of thought.
Great. Yeah, coming into the conversation tonight, I was thinking a lot about the social media post that 350 put out about focusing on permissions, and I was thinking about that saying that I'm sure everybody's heard before, that what you permit, you promote. And that was really sitting with me over the last couple of days coming into this webinar with all of you. And I was thinking about, what is it that we are promoting? What idea, what beliefs are we promoting by continuing to permit these polluting companies? And everything for the big ones, like, the conversation that Evan just ran you through with ArcelorMittal Dofasco, obviously the biggest, baddest guys on the block. But what I see in my neighborhood are dozens and dozens and dozens of other smaller industries, manufacturing facilities, factories that are probably not going to show up in anyone else's radar. But they're creating something that I feel like in environmental impact conversations, we've gotten out of the habit of talking about, and that's the cumulative impact. And it's the cumulative impact that's being felt by the people. My approach is not to look at the people-based impacts in isolation from the impacts of land, air, and water. But I do it, and my organization Pivot does it, because we've seen that there's a gap. And it's something I bring up when I'm talking with people who do environmental advocacy work across the city, is there seems to be a consistent gap in meeting people, the people who are living with those environmental impacts, meeting them where they are, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, and understanding, what does it feel like to live in those neighborhoods? I think, Lucia and Evan, you were just speaking a few moments ago about, how far the distance of that impact from a place like ArcelorMittal Dofasco travels. And it's not just people in the neighborhood, it can travel great distances. Yes, but for folks living in those sacrifice zones, and that's really what it feels like, we're not just dealing with a place like ArcelorMittal Dofasco, we're dealing with multitudes of other companies that you've probably never even heard of. And if you drive up and down the streets in these neighborhoods, and if we're looking at it from a city perspective, we're talking portions of Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4, and Ward 5. Not to say there aren't significant environmental impacts happening in other parts of the city, but that's sort of a concentration of these sorts of facilities. And residents are often living literally across the road, behind, right next to these smaller polluting facilities. Are they going to show up in something like the NPRI, the National Pollutant Release Inventory, whatever that thing is called? I don't know. In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. In some cases, these companies in isolation are polluting, emitting at a level where they don't even necessarily have to have an environmental compliance approval, right? The thing that we all know we can go on the ERO and make public comments about. In some cases, they're only at what the Ministry of the Environment calls the EASER level. Some of you might have heard of this. It's what's the acronym? Environmental Assessment Sector Registry. It's a completely voluntary registry where companies that aren't emitting at what the ministry considers significantly dangerous thresholds can just voluntarily register. But what happens when we allow that, we permit that, what we promote in our communities, that it's okay to stack company on company, factory on factory, business on business in these clusters in neighborhoods where people are living. People are living in these neighborhoods. They are typically lower income neighborhoods. They are typically, I would say, working class neighborhoods, which is not to say that the people living in those areas are consider themselves working class or are receiving lower incomes. But that's how we would broadly define those neighborhoods. There are people living in those neighborhoods that are being completely overlooked, by and large, by environmental advocacy work in Hamilton. There are conversations about these broad level impacts, but that kind of focus and that direct support and advocacy and solidarity with those folks who are living every day next to those polluting facilities, there's a lack of attention, I would say. And one of the thoughts that I wanted to bring into this conversation with you fine folks at 350 is going back to this theme of what we permit, we promote. If we permit our environmentally focused attention to not go towards those who are the most vulnerable, those who are on the front lines and fence lines of that impact, what message is that sending to both the companies that are responsible for those neighborhood level pollutions, but also what message is that sending to the ministry that regulates, in large part, most of those impacts? What are we saying to what image, what belief are we promoting to the city of Hamilton? That nobody cares about those neighborhoods. And so it's okay to continue to allow those businesses to operate as they have in those neighborhoods, because it's out of sight, out of mind for even the organizations and the groups of people who are directly invested in environmental activism, ostensibly. And so that's the concern that keeps me going, keeps me fired up and fueled up, and it keeps me invested in the work that I do with Pivot. And that was a perspective I wanted to bring into the conversation tonight. I think I'll tempt fate and the internet connection by sharing. I had a couple slides I wanted to share. I think it might be a little bit more than my internet can handle. But I thought it might be helpful, if you're not familiar with some of these areas, to show an example of a map. I had originally created this map through my Ward 3 work, and then it was deemed, and we could get into it if anybody's interested in hearing the story, it was deemed too political. The map was deemed too political to be a project that could be continued within my Ward 3 work. And so I had the privilege of being able to take it out of my Ward 3 work and make it into a Pivot project. So I'm going to just try to screen share here quickly and see how this goes. Let's see if it's going to let me do it.
Go ahead and try. And if you need to go off camera so that we can see the screen feed, we all totally get it.
Yeah, just one sec. Okay, I don't think that's going to work that way. Okay, I think I got it. Let's see if this is going to be success. Okay, can you all see that map? Yep. Okay, it's not super well zoomed in, but this is a map of roughly Ward 3. Again, as I said, it was originally started as a Ward 3 project. And if you don't know, the borders for Ward 3 are Wellington on the west side, Ottawa Street on the east side, and then between the escarpment and the I mean, I say the waterfront, but that presumes that we could actually access the waterfront, and of course we can. And that's something else we could talk about, is the fact that residents of huge swaths of the city don't have access to the water, polluted though it may be by industry, but we can access the water because of industry. But this map was created as a very in-depth project that was about mapping the biggest polluting nuisances, I guess I'll say, in Ward 3. And this was based on what residents living in my neighborhoods were telling me. These were the companies that people were asking us about. So what you can see, even from the section of the map that's available through the screen share, obviously, you know, again, there's the big bad guys. You've got your ArcelorMittal Dofasco, you've got your Stelco. But you can also see that the dotted on this map are, I think there's about 20 facilities that we put on this map. And this is in a relatively small section of Hamilton. And this is not exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive list. This was a list of companies that we could actually find public information on. And that's really important to also understand in terms of the burden that's placed on residents who are living with the impacts of these companies. In many cases, even though they could be right behind you or across the road from you, they're also tucked behind a fence. And you can't necessarily see, there's not like a giant sign outside saying, this is XYZ company, here's our phone number, here's our shareholder profile, here's our CEO, here's how to contact us, and here's how to complain about us. That's not possible. And so that creates an extra layer of burden for residents who are living with the impact of these companies, as there isn't even a clear way to complain about them. Even if they could find the information, there's really nobody listening. There's nobody listening. The Minister of the Environment's not listening if these companies don't have an ECA. For the most part, the city of Hamilton is mostly hands-off when it comes to certainly air pollution issues by and large. And typically, environmental advocacy organizations don't have this kind of work or these sorts of impacts on their radar. So there's very much a feeling of loneliness and isolation in these communities. And that's been going on for as long as I've been aware of these issues. And I live in these neighborhoods, so I have direct experience. So I'll stop the screen share there. So I'll just pause there. I know that I think you were maybe running a little bit late in your meeting, so I don't want to take up any more time, but really open to any questions or feedback, or if somebody wants to challenge. I love a good pushback, so very much open for that.
Well, Carrie, I've got a couple kind of prepared things, and I'm sure maybe people will have stuff to chime in. But so I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple practical steps. I know we could talk a lot about, some of the work you've done, some of the things you've shared, and certainly encourage folks to maybe look back at the city YouTube and see. I found the reaction to you coming to our climate change advisory committee that the city has very interesting, right? Like we have people who obviously know you and are familiar with this discussion, and people for whom it was very obviously the first time that they'd ever heard about this, right? Just going, oh my goodness, right? And like, so we had sort of the range of reactions, which is a little surprising, but not super surprising, right? People who came to the Climate Change Advisory Committee came from all different backgrounds, all different perspectives, applied for that city process. But one of the things that I think is sort of maybe interesting to ask about the solidarity piece, right? One of the reasons that I routinely try to highlight that people who live in Dundas are not exempt from this problem is because it's something that can, in my opinion, hopefully maybe build a little bit of that personal buy-in and solidarity. But as you point out, yes, that the radius of this bullseye is really big, but the impacts are really targeted in certain areas in ways that are not analogous. Like the people who are on the fence line do not have the same experience as someone who, yes, maybe does still have elevated cancer risk living, in a more idyllic setting. So when you say that, like, we want to build that solidarity, we want to build that, like, how do you think people can show up in these discussions and maybe not have the deer in the headlights response and come in at a better place to meet people, so it's not creating a new burden of explanation and all this other stuff, right? How can people sort of prepare to do that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is maybe it does touch back on what you were saying about people finding the solidarity through what could be a possible shared experience, but maybe understanding it's happening, more intensely in another area. I think what might be uncomfortable for folks to sit with is that maybe it's not a shared experience, and maybe it's not something that you can exactly relate to. And maybe you have to go past your own direct experience to just a place of pure, unbridled empathy for something that you may never have to experience yourself. I think that's something that we find shows up in these conversations is people saying, well, I can't really relate to this problem. Perhaps you can't. But if you are somebody that is speaking on climate justice and missing out on the local impacts of environmental injustice, you are really overlooking. It's actually just a lost opportunity. So to speak to your question, Lucia, of how do we make those connections? A lot of it is sort of showing up in community spaces. A lot of these neighborhoods are not, this is a more complicated question, but there aren't necessarily organized community groups. There's not like a neighborhood block of people who've come together and said, we're organized around environmental issues. It tends to be that people are mobilizing through the only means by which they have in these neighborhoods. And then the last little while that has been through the Ward 3 office and calling back to that work that I've done. Because we are not a city that has wrapped its arms around these neighborhoods of people to say, we're interested in your concerns. So one of the things that folks could do is, as opposed to what has been done in the past, which is a little bit of, it can verge on ghetto tourism, where people are doing walking tours in polluted neighborhoods, and then never stepping foot in those neighborhoods again. People who are interested in knowing what's happening in these neighborhoods and hearing the stories, host a meeting in those neighborhoods. There tends to not be a lot of third spaces or public places that you could meet, but they're not non-existent. There are places. So I think part of the outreach and the solidarity that demonstrates the understanding of privilege that folks who are not living with these conditions have is to not wait for people to come to you, right? To find those opportunities to reach out and show up in those neighborhoods and just be there with open ears. Open hearts would be lovely, but certainly open ears to hear what the challenges are. It's very unlikely to be the case that a well-organized, mobilized group of folks are going to come and ask for the help that they very much need. I've been working in community organizing in these neighborhoods for years now, and I've been carefully studying and listening and watching and learning from the patterns of people's behavior. And I feel like I can't over exaggerate how lonely the experience is and how isolated the experience is, and to pull yourself out of also the stigma of living in these neighborhoods with these impacts, to pull yourself out of all of that while you're also simultaneously living with those impacts, and go and cap in hand, as it may feel, like it can feel quite humiliating to then go to an organization of people or whatever the case may be and ask for help. Whew, that is more than many people can handle. And so there has to be another way to bridge that gap. I have tried to do the work myself by asking folks to attend meetings with some of these companies. That's another thing that's really desperately needed in these conversations, is the opportunity to name the source of the pollution. I feel like that's something that folks at 350 would be very comfortable doing. It's often not comfortable for other folks to really call out. You got to name and blame. Who are these companies? What are they doing to our neighborhoods? If that's something that folks aren't willing to do, it's not gonna take the conversation too far. But
I'll interject and say, we are the people who do that. You are correct. That is
yes.
us. We are the people who have nothing. We're not a registered nonprofit. We don't have all the baggage, right?
Yeah.
And so where I kind of want to go with the next actionable question is sort of the model of, I've been in a lot of organizing meetings where there's sort of there's two levels of this sort of self-flagellation. One is oh my gosh, we need to get people from X area need to be on X committee, right? That's how we're going to solve this problem, is by having this person come out bi-weekly and be part of this and I think you've already spoken a little bit to the fact that that is a burden. There is a reason. There are systemic reasons that we see representation of certain folks and not representation of other folks. And there's a little bit more work and recognition that goes into meaningfully working in solidarity, because many people on this call, one of the niches that we kind of fill in the Hamilton environmental sphere is that, A, we're the climate people. Also, B, we're often kind of the technical people. There's a lot of technical pieces, as you note from the update of the Conservation Matters group following all this legalese. There's technical details that our group had around the capacity of pipes to be dual use for future hydrogen, and talking to engineers at these liaison committees and finding out that there was no plan to switch to hydrogen. That's kind of one of the things we do, right? Is and these are not things that necessarily easily help bridge that gap by having talking past each other, having the community voice talking past some of the thing where it's like, sometimes people kind of get the track of like, but we're making progress on this one thing. We're making progress on this OLT proceeding. We're making progress on this project, and we want to keep focusing on that. How do we stop this sort of, not being on the same plane? And, is it that we recognize this gap in our advocacy and that we do the work to fill it? Is it that we empower people from different communities that are not currently at the table to come talk to us and tell us what they think that we need to be doing? Where do we as an organization and a group go from here to change the fact that there's a gap?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. And I think, to the point of, it's complicated, right? Because there's both the idea of saying, nothing about us without us. And so folks should be part of, consultation processes and decision making. But that's also labor. That's labor, and that's time, and that is a resource that folks living in some of these neighborhoods just may not have. There's such a challenge of capacity. As I said, when you're also dealing with lots of other life circumstances and living with the fact that you can't sleep any night of the week because, for example, with a company called Minova, which is a company located close to Barton and Gage. This is where I start to name and blame, right? Minova is close to Barton and Gage. They are a mining equipment manufacturing company. They are tucked in behind, they're in an old Buddhist temple. You would never know they were there if you didn't know they were there. But if you live in one of the dozen and a half or so houses that flanks this facility, you can't help but know they're there because you have not slept since April of last year, Easter weekend-ish of last year. We're coming up on 1 year that this company has been literally shaking the entire neighborhood in 60-second intervals of vibrations all day long, Monday to Friday, from about 8 in the morning to 4 or 5 in the afternoon. That's happening to people every single day. It is messing with their mental health, their physical health. It is affecting their family life. To ask someone in that situation who is living under those circumstances through no fault of their own, seeing very little relief, despite everybody that should be at the table, to ask someone like that to come and sit on an advisory committee and to also find the time to bring their story to someone else, it seems like a really unfair ask. So I don't have the magic bullet to say I know exactly how to create that connection, but I think it has to come from storytelling. And to go back to the comment you were making, Lucia, about the technical stuff, I think that's also, I'm going to use Minova again as an example of residents having to become overnight experts on some case, the lack of provincial guidelines on vibrations, and talking about decimal levels and all sorts of measurement technicality terms where, I can't keep up. And I have the privilege of being able to take a little bit of paid time to research things so that I can understand them better to help my neighbors. But there is an expectation of people being able to sort of, rise to the occasion, as it were, when they are being beaten down by the unrelenting and unregulated impacts of their closest industrial neighbor. We have to be able to do better to support these neighbors. And so the best suggestion that I can come up with is that it comes through storytelling. It's not requiring people to be an expert. It's not requiring people to have all the, say all the exact right words, but just to tell the story of how it feels. I cannot stress enough how much I've heard that from residents over the years of just a conversation that sometimes it borders on tears, sometimes it's all tears of just talking about how it feels to live with these stressors all the time. And there are dozens and dozens of these stories just in that map that I showed you, just in that part of the city, which is, I don't know, in terms of the land size, the land mass of the city of Hamilton, I'm sure it's, less than a tenth of the city, far less than, I'm sure. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of stories, clusters of stories, and that's not even the individual stories. So I think that the way that we bridge the gap is by starting to hear people's stories, and find ways to offer support. And sometimes it's just commiseration. And that's the work that we start to do with Pivot, is just connecting people in neighborhoods to each other, because sometimes they don't even know that they're experiencing the same thing as the person who's a block away from them. So just connecting people just as humans and letting them know you are seen, you are heard. We don't have a solution to this problem because it's systemic, and it ties back to those permissions that we were talking about and what we promote by allowing those things to be permitted. But just letting people know that validating what they're experiencing and that they're seen and heard, that's a huge start. And they don't get that from most of the environmental movement, if I can use that term very broadly, here in Hamilton. And that's a shame. It's a shame. It's a missing link. And it's, it's one of my missions to fix that. Yeah. And then I think to go back to the idea of what can 350 offer, for example, if you're a group of people with really strong ability to break down technical knowledge, that's a massive gift that you could be bringing to communities of people that don't have that capacity to do that. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, I see some long faces, but I want to highlight that I think, Carrie, I'm actually feeling very energized by having you come and talk about, because my head's full of ideas of ways that we can help, but not in a savory way, in a way of like, yeah, no, there are things we can do, like whether it's just even basic logistics. Like, we're an organization, we have 1,200 people on our mailing list, we have the resources to name and blame, as you said. We have volunteers, all of the people who do great work following the work that Conservation Matter does, going to all these different Conservation Authority meetings, auditing them, following them. That same level of rigor can be applied to other areas as well, and to bring in new voices and new perspectives across the city as well. So, I mean, certainly I see nothing short of tragedy in the fact that we are here, but lots of optimism in that. I think that the people who have stayed way, way, way over time for this powerful discussion have the open minds and open hearts that you're talking about, and the want to change that gap, and to make sure that it's not a gap. Steve, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out an event that really ties into what we've been talking about today. And if I can share my screen. Can you see that?
Good.
Oops, can you see that?
Oh,
Okay.
we had it and then lost it, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I'm just going to close the chat because it's covering this. But basically, this is next Monday, March the 2nd. There's an event that's being sponsored by Tammy Huang, Ward 4, that's going to talk about a lot of the things that have been covered. So the Canadian Environmental Law Association, which is trying to reform provincial laws around the environment and health. The What's the Grime team is it's a research program from MAC led by Dr. Sarah Styler, and they're researching a lot of the black soot that covers a lot of the houses in these areas that Kerry was talking about. And local residents, including people like Joachim Besner, who we've heard of recently, who used the Environmental Bill of Rights to ask the Ontario government to investigate air pollution in Hamilton. So this is an event that if anyone's interested in following up on what they've heard tonight, This is at the Hamilton Museum of Steam and Technology on Woodward Avenue, and it's next Monday, 2nd of March at 6 p.m. We can post that on the website.
Thanks for sharing the event, Steve. We got a correspondence from the Ward 4 team asking us if we could promote and get some folks to attend. So thanks for doing that. And I know, as I said, we've run very long, but I hope that everyone's really enjoyed the discussion. I'm curious, I don't know, Carrie, if you had any quick closing comments, and we'll wrap it up because I know it's getting late.
Yeah, thanks. I won't take up too much more time. Just thank you again for the opportunity to chat with everybody. And I will very quickly throw my email in the chat if anybody wants to be directly in touch with me. Oops, just switch out of that one. I would love to hear from anybody, and I will definitely keep in touch with 350. Pivot is rolling out lots of new programs and projects. And we have a semi-permanent home, which is really great. So we actually have a brick and mortar place that we can invite people to come and be in community with us. But yeah, I guess just closing thoughts, a huge fan of the work that 350 does here in Hamilton and in all parts around the world. And I think as I've had these sorts of conversations in the past, I always think it's really important to close on the idea that I think what I'm really calling people in to consider is this is an opportunity. And I know it can often be heard by people as a criticism or someone telling you, wagging their finger and saying you guys aren't doing this right. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there is something missing. And maybe it's not this group of people individually or together that will address this missing link. But maybe it will be, and maybe something that I've said will land with you, and we'll see things differently in the future, and maybe not. But I'm going to keep telling this part of the story. And so, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to do that with you folks tonight.
No, thanks.